Thanks for tuning in to the Real Women Chronicles podcast. I am your international certified life coach, Tiaudra Taylor. The sole purpose of this podcast is to get you from where you are now to where you want to be. Yes, it's time to break chains and to get unstuck. Thanks again for joining in. Let's begin. Welcome to the Real Women's Chronicles podcast. Today, this is podcast number 9, and I am your host, Tiaudra Taylor, certified life coach. If you are joining in for the first time, as always, I just would like to welcome you. If you are following along each week, each Wednesday to my podcast, I just thank you, and I have a feeling that God put us together for a reason, so I pray that this podcast and many others will help you along the way. So I'm going to jump right into today's podcast. I'm not going to keep you long. With the topic of this podcast, I'm going to talk a lot about obtaining happiness and how to be happy and sustain that feeling. As a life coach, I often think of steps in which a person can take in order to achieve a certain goal. Often these steps will serve as minor milestones or accomplishments that assist in them achieving a seemingly larger goal. So the coaching client ordeal is going to often involve steps. It's not always a one day, one size fits all type of program or one day coaching session and you're just on your way. Sometimes, for most of us, we need to gradually adapt to change because some of the thought processes that we have been established and embedded in our brains for so long that it takes steps and it takes you consciously making conscious decisions on a daily basis to change that and to break those chains. So, as I said, today's chat will be about obtaining the goal of happiness. And I want to just say that for some people, maintaining happiness is not an issue. I'm not going to say that the whole world deals with being unhappy. I have met people who are seemingly happy majority of the time. They look at the positives in situations and not the negatives. They're constantly optimistic, and I love these people. I don't envy them at all. I just love these people. Now, if you are anything like me, and in my past I've struggled to sustain happiness for long periods of times. If you're anything like me, then this podcast is for you. And happiness is something that you have to consciously work on by redirecting your thoughts and replacing them with the new ones. And that is how I worked on my personal journey of happiness. And it is an everlasting job. Because of course, feelings of defeat, feelings of negativity will often creep in for many of us. So it's all about learning how to look at the situation, how to view the situation, and how to redirect those thoughts so that they don't overcome you. So I'm going to go over 5 key steps that helped me in achieving happiness, and I hope and pray that it will help you as well. So let's jump into step 1. One thing that I think prohibits many of us from being happy is that we rely on people too much to make us happy. The issue with that is people cannot be our sole source of happiness. God has to be our source of happiness. And whenever you find yourself pulling more on people to find happiness and joy and less on God, you will be out of balance. And it will be a natural thing for you to feel like you're on an emotional roller coaster, because that is what people would potentially take you on when you're constantly depending on them to make you happy. I was one of those ones personally back in my 20s that I was kind of codependent in a sense. So somebody else's happiness depended on my happiness. And I don't know if anybody listening can relate to that. But if the kids weren't happy, I wasn't happy. If my boyfriend wasn't happy, I wasn't happy. So it was like my happiness was constantly dependent upon somebody else that I loved dearly being happy. So you can only imagine the roller coaster that I was constantly on. I could be having a good day, but hey, once I hear from this boyfriend who's having a bad day, there goes my days, just down the drain. I'm right there where he's at. At the time, I wasn't strong enough to protect my energy and to protect my space and just take observant type of viewpoint on their situation so that I'm not overcome with their emotions. So definitely step one, stop relying on people for your happiness. Your happiness is your responsibility and your responsibility alone. Okay, let's move on to step two. Start caring less about what people think about you. Let me tell you, this is so important because many times our source of unhappiness is because somebody else who's probably unhappy too is judging us. And through us feeling that judgment or feeling somewhat ashamed or feeling like we're not good enough because of somebody else's judgment, we internalize it and we end up being unhappy because of somebody else's unhappiness. Many times people who are constantly judging you and putting in their 2 cents about your lives, I'm going to be honest, they are some of the people that have the most baggage going on. So when we care so much about what somebody else says or somebody else thinks about us and less about what we think of ourselves, we will find ourselves unhappy on a constant basis. Oh my gosh, they think I'm too fat, or they think I'm too promiscuous, or whatever it may be, because because your thoughts become things, and that's very important. So whenever you have thoughts that stimulate from other people and you internalize it, it becomes things. You end up becoming these things that they accuse you of because you've now overtaken it. And a lot of times it's a lie. It's a trick of the enemy. You are not that person. And who cares about somebody else's opinion on your life? The only opinion that should ever matter should be your own. And your happiness should never be dictated over somebody else's lack of happiness. Because truthfully, being someone who was on both sides of the spectrum in my life, I really truly believe that happy people don't hate. Okay, so let's move on to step 3. Events don't cause feelings. Okay, it's your belief about the event that do. So I'm gonna repeat it so that you catch it. The event does not cause the feeling of unhappiness. It's your belief about the event that does. For example, there is a particular country, I don't want to lie to you, I forget the name, but it was used in an example in one of my classes back in college, and there's a particular country, that rejoices when people pass away, and they mourn when they're born. And again, that is a prime example of an event. Here they have a event of death, which of course for many of us, we mourn, we're unhappy during that time. Well, they choose to believe differently about that event, and that belief changes how they feel. So again, the event that's happening in your life, that loss of that loved one, that breakup, that loss of the job, whatever that event is, know that the event is not causing you to be unhappy. It's how you're looking at it. And if you can just change your perspective about how you're looking at that situation or that event or that person or that thing, then it could change your whole outcome and just how you feel. And I don't know about you guys, but listen, life is too short to walk around unhappy. We don't know how much time we have on earth, and we don't want to spend that time making ourselves miserable and thinking ourselves into a depression because we're allowing repetitive negative thoughts to overtake us majority of our day. Thoughts that can be redirected, thoughts that we choose to think. And I think that's what we forget. We forget that we really have the power over controlling our brain, but instead we just allow our brain to control us. But remember, your brain is the hard drive. Your brain needs exercise. Your brain needs the right food. And if you're not feeding it in the way that you should and taking care of it, and you're just letting it just go astray, you're not exercising, you're not learning new ways and different ways to be better, and to think better, then your brain is just operating probably on a subconscious basis where you are just reacting and acting out things that are stuck in your subconscious mind that you're not conscious of, and you're just you're repeating probably cycles that you've learned since childhood. Maybe your parents were negative thinkers, or maybe you had parents, or you have people around you who are constantly negative and unhappy, and it's just subconsciously you adapt that same feeling, and now you've been stuck in it for 5-10 years now, and you don't know how to unwrap and undo these things. Okay, step 4. Okay, feelings will cause you to believe fiction over fact. And let me explain to you. You would be surprised how often we make ourselves unhappy over what ifs and maybes. What if this doesn't work out? What if I'm making the wrong decision? What if I never lose the weight? What if I never get pregnant and have that baby? What if I never get married? We make ourselves so miserable over things that haven't even happened yet. Maybe I won't find the right guy. I mean, we will honestly drive ourselves to a state of depression over things that have not happened yet. And as I said, thoughts become things. So when you think low, you attract things of a low level. And that's what amazes me about adulthood. As a child, you had that imaginary belief system that you could believe in the impossible. And that's why the Bible talks about us going to God in a childlike mind, because he wants us to come to us. He wants us to come to him, in a childlike mind, because if you remember, children would pretty much believe almost anything. And you want to have that level of faith. Unfortunately, I know life has happened to many of us. We're older now, and we just literally look at things and judge it on how things worked out in the past. And that is the biggest mistake that many of us make, because the past really doesn't dictate the future. Your future can be so much brighter than your past if you just welcome it and you allow it in. So don't stress yourself out over what ifs and maybes. Go off fact and not fiction. Okay. Step 5 is going to be my last step, because I'm going to keep this short tonight. Step 5, people get comfortable with unhappiness, so much so that they either recreate it in many situations, or they just simply choose to focus on the things that make them unhappy. I was one of them. And again, I always tell my clients, and I'm pretty sure if you've been listening to my podcast, you've heard me say it here. I really feel like God took me through these seasons so that I can be a blessing and I can help somebody else come out of it. Because I literally would, if things were going right, I literally would look for what was going wrong. It was a habit, a negative habit that I had. And maybe some of you understand and maybe you don't, but sometimes you will find yourself focusing on everything that's not working out, and you miss out on all the blessings. The fact that you got that roof over top of your head, the fact that you may have good health, the fact that you may have a good job. You forget about all these things because you're focusing on that one breakup or that one thing that didn't work out, and you're missing out on all the blessings that are around you. And I just pray that you no longer miss out on these things because you're choosing unhappiness. And I know that's tough love right there to tell you that you could potentially be choosing it, but it's possible. Again, like I said, you could be looking, the event that you're looking at is not dictating your happiness, is your feelings about that event. And if you can just change it, you can change how you feel. Okay. As I stated to you guys, this podcast wasn't going to be a super long podcast today. I thank you guys for joining in. Before we close out, I want to just say a quick prayer. If you could just stay with me, and we're going to say a quick prayer. Father God, I thank you for allowing us to come together another day, and just to talk about being happy. I understand that you are our source. Ultimately, you serve the place of comfort. You give us the place of security, and you bring the joy deep down in our hearts. Help us to seek you first, Father God, so that we can maintain that joy and not look to man or people to make us happy. Help us to find that joy and to tap into the strength that you've already given us so that we can exhibit that joy and you can see it glowing through our skins, Father God. We thank you for being here on this podcast, Father. Thank you for using me to motivate your people, Father God. And we just pray that you